بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the beginning of the 7th year of Hijrah, had decided to attack the village of Khaybar, as it was the last stronghold of the Jews at the time. And the Jews were continuing to stir problems around Arabia. They were continuing to provoke the tribes to attack Medina and to attack Islam. So now, with the truce implemented between the Muslims and the pagans of Quraysh, the Prophet ﷺ had all the time to attack the remaining stronghold of the Jews. So he declared that in Medina and instructed that only those who are willing to fight at the side of the Prophet ﷺ and for the sake of Allah would come with him. Meaning that he told the hypocrites that there will not be any booty. So they will not get any use of going out with him. So the majority of those who went with the Prophet ﷺ were those who gave him the pledge of allegiance under the tree of Ridwan, or who gave him the pledge of Ridwan when they were prevented from entering Mecca for Umrah on Hudaybiyah. The Prophet ﷺ left Medina with his companions. Now we all know that the village of Khaybar is to the northeast of Medina. And if you look at the map, you would find that the Prophet ﷺ took a very interesting route. He came from the northern part of Khaybar instead of coming from the southern part, which is closer to Medina. And the reason behind this choice of the Prophet ﷺ, he wanted to cut the way so that the Jews could not flee and get reinforcement from their allies, the tribes of Ghatafan, and they cannot flee to a Sham area, the Sham region. So the Prophet ﷺ had a very tactical and strategic move to prevent them from escaping. And he attacked Khaybar from the northern part of it. Now, Khaybar was divided into two parts. The first part was divided into also two parts. And these parts were known as An-Natat and Ash-Shaq. And the first part, which is An-Natat, was composed of 3 fortresses known as the fortress of Na'im, As-Sa'b ibn Mu'adh, and the fortress of Az-Zubayr. While Ash-Shaq was composed of the fortress of Ubay and the fortress of Nizar. And they were all strongholds, in the sense that they were all elevated from the ground. They were in a high position. So whoever wanted to attack them was from below of that high position. The Prophet ﷺ, first of all, started by surrounding and sieging the place, the area, and the Jews would not give in. The Prophet ﷺ would keep on inviting them to accept Islam, and they would not comply. And they said bad things to the Prophet ﷺ. Why were they so defiant? Why didn't they accept the call for truce or to surrender? Didn't they learn from Bani Qaynuqa, from Banu Nadir, from Bani Qurayza? Didn't they learn from what took place in the previous battles with the tribes of Arabia? Didn't they learn from what took place in Mecca with Quraysh when they tried to attack the Muslims in the Battle of Badr, and also what took place in the Battle of Uhud? They were hoping that they would be the one to succeed in defeating the Muslims. And why was that? Because they were promised by Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul that don't pay any attention to the army of the Prophet ﷺ, and he gave them an early warning before the Prophet ﷺ reached their village. Abdullah ibn Ubay sent them a message telling them that the Prophet is coming, take your guard, and don't worry, because the men with him are not fully, they're not fully armed, and they're few, and you have the upper hand. The Jews were not satisfied with the promise of Abdullah to come to the rescue. They themselves sent two of their dignitaries, Kinana ibn Abi al-Haqiq and Hawza ibn Qais. They sent both men to the tribes of Ghatafan, telling the tribes of Ghatafan that we will give you half of our fruits of Khaybar for 1 year.
Okay.
And they promised to come and assist.
If they succeeded in defeating the Muslims?
No, if they came to their rescue, not defeating. They just wanted them to fight with them. So of course, if they won the war, this means that the Jews will comply and fulfill their promise to the tribe of Ghatafan.
Yeah.
So when they were surrounded by the Muslims, and the Prophet ﷺ is calling them to surrender, they would not comply and accept this, on the hope that Abdullah ibn Ubay will send his army of hypocrites, and the tribes of Ghatafan will also send their reinforcement to the rescue. And to their unfortunate luck, none of the above took place.
As
Abdullah,
usual.
yes, it is the habit of Abdullah, Ibn Ubay, the head of the hypocrites. He did not send a single soldier. And the tribe of Ghatafan, they've tasted the strength of the Muslims before, and they've tasted what Allah Azza wa Jal had done to them on the battle of Al-Khandaq, Al-Ahzab, the battle of the trench and the battle of the parties. So they thought that let the Prophet ﷺ take care of the Jews, the hell with them.
Everything will go in vain.
They knew that it was inevitable. The Prophet ﷺ was victorious, whether they like it or not. The Prophet ﷺ started by sieging their main and biggest fortress. And they fought bravely, but it was all in vain. The Prophet ﷺ told the Muslims that Allah and the Prophet ﷺ will give the flag tomorrow on the day of Khaybar to a man who is loved by Allah and the Prophet ﷺ, and who himself loved Allah and the Prophet ﷺ.
He was Ali ibn Abi Talib.
Umar ibn al-Khattab at first thought and wished to be the one. He says that I've never prayed and hoped and looked for being the leader except in this event, because it's a testimony from the Prophet ﷺ that this man is loved by Allah and by the Prophet ﷺ. They all gathered. Everyone is wishing and hoping to be the one. Zubair ibn Awwam, Muhammad ibn Maslama, everyone was hoping to be the chosen one. And when it was morning, the Prophet ﷺ asked, where is Ali ibn Abi Talib? So they told him that he was ill. He had a sore eye, or he had trachoma in his eye. So they carried him to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet spit in his eyes, and it was as if it had nothing wrong with it. He was cured on the spot. So he gave him the flag and he told him, go to Khaybar and fight. So he went. And just as he was going out, not looking at the Prophet ﷺ, told him, go where and do what? What to fight them on? So the Prophet instructed him to go and fight in the name of Allah and call them to Islam. Not only to fight, to call them to Islam. And he told him that if you succeed in getting one man into Islam, this is far greater to you than the wealth of the whole world. Which indicates that the Prophet ﷺ message was for the guidance of humanity, not for bloodshed, not for killing people, and not for gathering this worldly booties. He went to call people to Islam and to get them out from darkness into the light. The first fight was at the fortress of Na'im, where
the most powerful fort.
It is the most powerful fort. And in it was the most powerful Jew by the name of Marhab. And he, among the Jews, was considered to be equivalent to 1,000 warrior. So he went out of the fortress and he sought a duel. He challenged the Muslims who would like to come and fight. So the first one to come and fight with him was Amir ibn al-Akwa, the uncle of Salama ibn al-Akwa. May Allah be pleased with them both. He was a strong warrior. So he came and exchanged blows with him. And the first blow fell into his armor. So his sword was stuck. So he went to hit him once again, and by mistake, his sword cut his elbow, a vein in his elbow. And some say it hit his knee. So he was injured. And he died because of this injury. So the companions thought that he caused himself to die, so his struggle and jihad was in vain. And Salama heard this, and he was very angry. So he went to the Prophet ﷺ, and he told him about what the people talk and say. And he himself, the Prophet ﷺ, told him, this is complete lie. Amir ibn al-Akwa has two rewards. And he is among the best of my companions. So, again, Marhab is calling for a duel. Who fought him? This is inshallah what we will get to know after the break. Stay tuned.
So this is an open invitation for everybody to recognize God and enjoy His blessings in this life and His mercy in this life and in the hereafter as well. Allah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. Each name has a meaning. Each name signifies a nature of Allah the Almighty which no one shares or is compared to Allah in it.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back. So, after Amr could not achieve the mission in that duel and win the battle, win the fight with Marhab, Marhab bragged about it and kept on saying poetry that I am the one and only who's man enough to come and fight me. And stepped forward was Ali ibn Abi Talib, may Allah be pleased with him. He came also saying poetry to Marhab, and they exchanged blows, and not before long, Marhab was a dead body. His brother Yasir saw this and out of anger came out and also sought a duel with the Muslims. And Zubair ibn al-Awwam, may Allah be pleased with him, came forward and killed him in seconds. The Muslims fought for 3 days and nights, besieging this fortress, as the Jews left this fortress and went to the other fortress by the name of Sa'b. And the Muslims, for 3 days and nights, besieged that fortress and felt really tired and hungry. And among the best tribes that fought that day was the tribe of Aslam, Banu Aslam. And due to their hunger, they slaughtered donkeys, and they ate these donkeys. And before, it was permissible for them to eat donkeys. And in this battle, the Prophet ﷺ told them that it had become forbidden for them, for Muslims, to eat donkeys. So domestic donkeys, it's forbidden for us to eat, while zebras, wild donkeys, are permissible for us to eat. And this tells us something. It tells us that if you ask a person, a Muslim, what are you allowed to eat? The answer would be everything, except 1, 2, 3, and 4. The things that we're not allowed to eat are a handful. Therefore, everything in this world is permissible for us to consume and eat, except the things that Islam told us that it is forbidden to eat. Again, the Jews sneaked out to another fortress, and to the other, and to the other, until they went from Al-Natat, the area, into Al-Katiba, and leaving their children and leaving their own wives as prisoners to the Muslims, because they just wanted to flee the fighting. And in so many incidents, the Jews themselves were betrayed by their own people. In one incident, while the Muslims were surrounding one of the strongholds, they could not open that fortress. They could not conquer it. So a Jew came and told them that even if you stay there for a whole month, you would not be able to open that fortress, simply because they come out at night and they take water from their wells and from their springs and go back again. But if you cut their supply of water, you will be able to defeat them in a matter of days. And so did the Muslims. They cut the supply of water and they managed to defeat them. The Prophet ﷺ managed to surround and besiege Al-Katiba, which is the one with the 3 fortresses, that was weak, that was not as strong as the other, Al-Natat and the Shaq. And he surrounded it for 14 days. And Allah Azza wa Jal threw the fear and terror in the Jews' hearts. They decided to surrender to the Prophet ﷺ on the condition that they may leave with the clothes they're wearing, along with their wives and children. The Prophet ﷺ agreed on that, and he took their promise that they would not deprive, or they would not prevent him from anything that they have. Only your clothes, you're allowed to go out. You're not allowed to keep any gold or silver or treasures or anything of value. And if you do not disclose these things to me, if I knew that you were holding it back or hiding it, this gives me the right to kill you. So their leaders agreed to that, and among them was Kinanah ibn Rabi' ibn Haqiq. He was their treasurer, and he brought him forward and he asked him about the money and the wealth, and he swore that they didn't have anything one of his cousins came and, as they say, blew the whistle on him. And he told the Prophet ﷺ that I've seen him go around a particular area. They dug that area and they found the treasures and the wealth of the Jews. So the Prophet ﷺ instructed his companions to kill him, because the Jews themselves killed one of his companions a few days earlier, and that was Mahmud ibn Maslama, the brother of Muhammad ibn Maslama. They threw a big stone in his head from one of their fortresses, and he died. So he executed him in exchange for the killing they did. Now, Khaybar was in the hands of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions.
Sheikh, I would like to ask about the main reason to attack Khaybar.
The main reason was it had the Jews in it. And the Jews would never ever honor their treaties. So they kept on trying to provoke the tribes of Ghatafan. They were aiding the polytheists in Quraysh, and they were going out of their way to undermine any effort of the Muslims to live a normal and peaceful life. And that is why whenever the Prophet ﷺ exiled any of the tribes, the previous tribes of Bani Qurayza or Bani Nadir, they went to Khaybar. And they kept on with their secret communications with the people of Quraysh and with Ghatafan, trying to find the right moment and the right spot to attack Islam. And that is why it was inevitable that the Prophet ﷺ would go and punish them. But this was not the proper time because of his struggle with the people of Quraysh, of Mecca. And now, after the truce is implemented with the people of Mecca, it was time for him to move on and clear this front of the Jews.
So he was planning to attack them before, but he was waiting for the right moment.
Of course, yes, he was. The Prophet ﷺ had plans for everything.
Yeah.
But he was waiting always for the right moment so that he would not jeopardize this young nation of Islam in Medina. The Prophet ﷺ started to divide the booty they got from Khaybar. And the Muslims, because of their small number, they had a lot for each one of them. And Abdullah ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, said that we never had enough of food until we conquered Khaybar. And you remember that we've said that Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, told us that 2 months used to pass on the houses of the Prophet ﷺ without fire being ignited inside it to cook on. And they would never eat cooked food for two consecutive months. And when Urwa ibn Zubair, her nephew, asked her, so what did you eat? She told him, in these 2 months we had only dates and water to feed on. So Ibn Umar, when he says that he never had a full stomach except when Allah Azza wa Jal granted them and gave them Khaybar, this tells us about the booty they got from Khaybar. One also important thing to know is that the migrants and muhajirin, they themselves, after the Battle of Khaybar, gave back all the farms, all the trees, all the palm trees that their brothers from the Ansar gave them when they first came to Medina. If you recall, when they came to Medina, they were poor, they had nothing. So their brothers gave them half of their property, the farms. The Ansar gave them half of the farms, and they refused to take that. So they asked them, is it okay for you if you work in our farms and we give you half of the harvest? So the muhajirun accepted that. And now, after Khaybar, they had enough money to give back to their brothers from the Ansar what they shared with them in the very beginning. Now, the Jews had nowhere to go. The only place for them to go was to Sham, which means that they have to leave the whole of the Arabian Peninsula.
Yeah.
So they came up with the idea, and they suggested to our Prophet ﷺ that they remain in Khaybar, and they work as laborers, not owning the land, because the land is not theirs anymore. And they suggested to the Prophet ﷺ that they would work as laborers, and they would take half of whatever they farm for. They take half of the crops. So the Prophet ﷺ gave the matter some thought, because the Muslims did not have slaves.
Yeah.
The Muslims were not free to go and work in these farms. It's 100 kilometers to the north of Medina. It's far. So the Prophet ﷺ gave the idea some thought, and he came to the conclusion that that was a good suggestion. So he agreed that the Jews remain in their village, though it's not their village anymore, it's not their land, it's not their farm. And he told them that he has one condition, that is, you may work in Khaybar as long as we allow you to. But once we think, or once I think it's time for you to leave, without any notice, I may ask you and order you to leave Khaybar and go. To the Jews, this was an excellent compromise, because this meant that they kept their houses, they stayed in the land, and they kept on farming and harvesting. And to the Muslims also, it was good, because they had people to work on these lands and pay them half of what Allah Azza wa Jal gave them from it. I believe that this is all the time we have for today's program. Until we meet next time, fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.